Hello my friends, Al Furtado here, the Rebel Turner, and I'm back. I am back with the most asked question from you guys on what do I do or why do I turn green? What is the outcome? What happens to it after weeks of it being turned? And even though I am one that I welcome what Mother Nature might decide to do, slight modification to the finished piece, where the piece finally reaches its development point. I mean, that question comes all the time. There'll be people who watch the video that I specifically talk about it, and they will question me about it at the end. It just means that they're not watching the whole video. So you want to know, watch the video. But anyway, I get asked all the time. Here's a perfect example of some recently greened turn. How green? Water coming out of it green. Just cut off the tree green. Pluck the leaves off it green. That's how green it is. All but for this one. These four pieces were all done of the ficus / maybe banyan because of the way it grew. So what happens after I turn it green? This is what happens. This was turned 3 weeks ago. So this little area right here, I don't know if you can see that. I'll show you on that camera. Okay. Has a slight lump around this darker, this medium brown coloring that's going around this area right here. Shrinkage. Other than that, absolutely nothing happened to it. So some woods will react different, there's no doubt about it. Oak, fruit trees, cherry can be a little bit more problematic than a lot of other woods. So here's a perfect example of what happens to green turn. Here's example number 2 of what happens to green turning. Absolutely nothing. The piece is perfectly cylinder because it's thin enough when it was turned. No cracking, a little bit of shrinkage on the bark between the separation of the bark, not separation, but just a little shrinkage around the bark area. Other than that, the shape that I turned is the shape that it was. Okay, how about more refined pieces? Well, like this one. Again, turned about a month ago. Everything is still intact. Bark is intact. The pits. One here, one here. No checking, no shrinkage. The bowl is still perfectly round because it somewhat catches end grain in both directions, so it can't go different from one area to the other. So depending on how you mount your piece, how you cut it, what's the approach, whether if it's end grain, whether if it's a side, natural edge, not natural edge. If you do on a side grain and you do on a natural edge, you don't worry about it. Shrinkage, because it really does not affect it, because generally they look like they're tub shaped, long on one side. Even though they're cylinder, they're circular. If you took that circle all the way around, and if you had wood over there, it would look to be a perfect circle. But because the bark is high on the two ends, it ends up looking like it's oblong. And so anyway, with pieces like that, you don't worry about the shrinkage, because it doesn't matter if it shrinks down a little bit. It will just be a little bit more oblong, as long as your base stays true. But if your base does not say true, you didn't give it enough of a concave where it's sitting, well, a month down the road, if that's the case, you can always just run it on a piece of flat paper on a tabletop, run it back and forth, that will flatten it up. Or if you have a disc sander, you can bring it up to the disc sander, screw it up over there. If you want, you can always do the mounting method that I use with a soft pad on the lathe, put it back in, bring your live center close, maybe with a soft center if you need to, and turn it fairly slow, and you can retrue that area back to its original. That's the things that that you have to watch for, is how it will sit later on. So another piece with the mix of epoxy and the wood, bark, same thing with the sap, separation of the bark between the two areas. And again, I have a little bit of a hump over there, which was not there when I turned it. So the bark has shrunk a little bit more than the wood itself. So it gave me that slight indent. It's like a stitching going up the piece. But do I welcome that? You better believe it, I welcome that. So I am not worried about what happens, except if you get something, let me see if I can show that. Something like this. Okay, the bark has literally raised up a little bit on that area. So what do? It's still perfectly okay to put a little CA there, put it under pressure, just to lock up that bark. Because if you remember while I did this turning, I actually lost the whole top section of the bark. It just came off, which was at this line right here. So the bottom did not come out and I did not glue it, but this came out. So where I glued it, it's perfectly fine. Where I didn't come off and it didn't glue it, then I have that little raise. So at this point, I'm in the shop. I will apply a little bit of CA glue to that, and this piece will never change from what its shape is right now. It will always maintain this shape. So the whole point is, do not be afraid to turn green. I rather turn green than dry, spalted, bunky wood anytime. Anytime. There you go, a quick video, turning green and not losing the art that you create.